Something strange began to happen on the Western Front in the autumn of 1944. All through the daylight hours, German tank crews fought like the masters they were, picking off American Shermans at distances the Americans could not even shoot back from, bleeding the advance one burning tank at a time. And then the sun would go down, and the same crews that had owned the battlefield an hour before would pull their machines back, button up, and refuse to fight. Not because they were ordered to rest, because somewhere in those long months a truth had crept through the Panzer arm that no one wanted to say aloud. After dark, the hunter became the hunted. This is the story of how the night was taken from the finest tanks in the world.
It is one of the strangest reversals of the entire war, and it has been almost entirely written out of the popular story. We remember the daylight duels, the Tiger that knocked out 10 Shermans, the Panther that ruled a kilometre of open ground. We do not remember that those same tanks, those same crews, came to dread the fall of evening, and that American commanders learned to do their worst killing in the dark. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what the night did to a German tank, why no amount of armour or gun could fix it, and why a tank the Germans openly mocked became the one thing they would not face once the light was gone.
There is an order, repeated in different words across different units, in the memoirs and the after-action reports, that sounds at first like madness from an army that prided itself on aggression. Avoid the night engagement. Do not seek the enemy after dark. Hold, withdraw, wait for the light. German commanders who had been taught from cadet school to attack, 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 were now telling their best crews to do the opposite the moment the sun touched the horizon. Hold that order in your mind. Everything in this story bends back toward it, toward the night the German tank stopped being a predator and learned for the first time what it felt like to be prey.
To understand the fall, you have to understand the throne. By 1944, the German tank had become, in pure daylight gunnery, the most dangerous machine on the battlefield. The Panther and the Tiger carried guns that could punch through a Sherman at a mile and beyond, and optics, Zeiss glass, beautifully made, that let a gunner find a target in the haze long before that target could find him. On open ground, in good light, the math was merciless. A German tank could sit hull down at 2,000 meters and destroy Sherman after Sherman, while the American shells fell short or bounced away. The crews knew it. They had been told they were the elite, and in the daylight, they were.
And the tank sent against them was, on paper, a joke. The American M4 Sherman was smaller, its armour thinner, its gun, for most of the war, too weak to kill a Panther head-on. German crews had a contemptuous nickname for the way it burned, the Tommy Cooker. The Americans had their own grim version, the Ronsom, after the lighter that lights every time. A Sherman that took a German round tended to brew up fast, and its crews paid in fire for every yard of France. By every measure a German gunner respected, gun, armour, optics, range, the Sherman lost. Which is exactly why what happened in the dark made no sense to them, and broke something in their confidence that armour could never repair.
In daylight, the kill ratios told a story the Germans loved. It often took 4 or 5 Shermans to deal with a single Panther in a straight fight, and whole American companies were gutted trying to cross open ground that one well-sighted German tank could sweep. The men in the Tigers and Panthers grew used to a particular feeling, the calm of the long-range hunter, the one who sees first, shoots first, and is gone before the enemy can reply. That feeling, was the heart of the German tank arm. It was their religion. And, like every faith built on a single advantage, it had one condition hidden inside it that no one wanted to test. It only worked if you could see.
The first cracks came in small, ugly incidents that the daylight men waved away. A panther, supreme at 1,000 meters, knocked out at 50 by a Sherman that had simply appeared out of the dusk on its flank. A tiger crew that fought all day without a scratch, lost in a night withdrawal to enemies they never saw. At first, these were blamed on bad luck, green crews, the chaos of retreat. But the pattern kept repeating, and it always wore the same shape. The German tank was killed close. It was killed from the side, and it was killed in the dark, by an enemy it had not seen coming, the exact opposite of every daylight victory it had been built to win. Picture one of those nights. A tiger, the most feared tank in the world, sits at the edge of a French village as the last light drains from the sky. The commander has had a good day. 3 American tanks burn somewhere out in the fields behind him. Now he hears them again, the unmistakable rattle and squeal of Sherman tracks, more than one, moving in the dark beyond the hedges. In daylight, this would be a turkey shoot. He orders the gunner to traverse onto the sound. The turret begins to turn, slow, toward an enemy he cannot see. And in the blackness to his flank, much closer than the sound he is chasing, a second set of tracks has already stopped, and a gun is already laid on the thin plate behind his crew.
This is the secret the darkness kept. Everything that made the German tank superior was an advantage of sight. The long gun was only deadly if the gunner could find the target. The beautiful optics only mattered if there was light to gather. The thick frontal armor only protected the tank if it could keep that front pointed at a threat it could see coming. Night took all of it away in a single stroke. A tiger in the dark could not shoot 2,000 meters because it could not see 20. Its great gun became a club it could not aim. Its optics gathered nothing. And worst of all, it could no longer choose where the threat would come from.
And now, the despised Sherman revealed the thing no German specification sheet had ever respected. Its turret turned fast. Power traverse that could spin the gun a full circle in 15 seconds or less, smooth and quick under one man's hand. On the open battlefield, where engagements were decided at long range by who shot first from a mile away, that speed barely mattered. The Panther's slower traverse had all the time in the world. But a night fight was not a duel of patience. It was a knife fight in a dark room, decided in 2 or 3 seconds at 30 meters. And in those seconds, the tank that could whip its gun onto a muzzle flash first was the tank that lived. Suddenly, the Sherman's pointless fast turret was the most valuable thing on the field.
Think of what that did to the numbers the Germans trusted. In daylight, it took 5 Shermans to kill a Panther, because the fight happened at the range where German armor and guns ruled. Bring that same fight to 30 meters in the dark, where armor thickness barely matters because every shot finds a weak spot, where the first gun on target wins and the Sherman's gun swings twice as fast, and the arithmetic does not just shift, it inverts. The 5-to-1 that had protected the German tank all day became, after sunset, something closer to its opposite. The crews could not have put it in those terms, but they could feel it. They could feel every advantage they owned setting with the sun, and something they could not name rising in its place.
It was made worse by a gap the Germans had never thought to close. Their tanks had superb daylight optics, and almost nothing for the dark. A few late Panthers carried experimental infrared sights,
the famous vampire, but they were rare, unreliable, starved of fuel and parts, far too few to matter across a front. For the ordinary Tiger or Panther crew, night was simply an absence. They peered through vision blocks at a wall of black, opened hatches and exposed their heads to listen, fired blind at sounds and muzzle flashes. The most advanced tanks in the world, after dark, were reduced to frightened men in a steel box, guessing where the enemy was. And the enemy, it turned out, had decided to stop guessing.
Because while the German tank went blind, the Allies were learning to turn night into something they could fight in. One of the strangest tools of the war was a tactic the British called artificial moonlight, and the troops called Monty's moonlight, banks of powerful searchlights aimed not at the enemy but at the clouds, bouncing a soft, even glow back down over the battlefield. It was enough to silhouette a German tank against the lighter ground, enough for a Sherman gunner to make out a shape, lay his fast gun and fire, while the German, looking out toward the dark, saw nothing but glare. The side that had been forced into the night by Allied air power was now being hunted within it by Allied light.
Where the searchlights did not reach, the Americans brought their own light to the killing. Artillery and mortars hung parachute flares over suspected German positions, swinging pools of hard white light that turned a hidden panther into a black cutout on a glowing field. White phosphorus shells were burst nearby, not always to burn, but to throw up a wall of brilliant smoke that backlit anything in front of it. Tracer fire drew bright lines straight to a target for every other gun to follow. Piece by piece, the Americans built a way to do at night what the Germans could only do by day. See the enemy first and shoot him before he could reply. They were stealing the one thing the German tank could not fight without.
It came together on nights like one outside a shattered town in the winter of the Ardennes, when an American tank company was warned that German armor was massing in the dark to its front. There would be no waiting for dawn. The order went out to fight the night battle on American terms. Forward observers laid on the flares. Searchlight crews readied the beams. The Sherman commanders, who an hour before had every reason to fear what was rolling toward them, instead crept their tanks into hull-down positions along the flanks of the expected German line, and waited, gun barrels cold, for the enemy to come blind into the trap. When the first German engines growled out of the blackness, no one on the American side fired. Not yet. They were waiting for the light.
Here, another quiet American advantage came into its own. Every Sherman carried a radio. Not a few command tanks, every tank. And the crews had drilled until talking under fire was second nature. In the dark, where a commander could see almost nothing of his own platoon, that net of voices became the nervous system of the whole formation. One tank that spotted a German shape could put every other gun onto it with a sentence. Infantry tucked in the hedgerows could whisper a warning of tracks in the dark. Artillery a mile back could drop flares on a word. The German tanks, by contrast, fought the night increasingly alone, each crew an island. Then the flares went up. In an instant, the field outside that Ardennes town turned from black to a swinging, ghastly white. And the German tanks, moving forward, guns pointed ahead at an enemy they still could not see, were suddenly lit from the side, silhouetted, fixed. The Shermans on the flanks did not need to find the strong frontal armor the Germans had trusted all day. They were looking straight at the thin side plate, at the engine deck, at the running gear. Fast turrets swung the short distance onto lit targets. The first volley took the lead panzers before their turrets could even begin to turn toward the new threat. What had, in daylight, a one-sided slaughter in Germany's favour, was now a one-sided slaughter the other way. And this time,
It was the German crews who were burning in the dark. And there was a final cruelty folded into the dark, one the German crews discovered the hard way. When a panzer did fire back into the night, firing blind at a sound, at a guessed position, its great gun betrayed it. The big German guns threw an enormous muzzle flash, a brilliant tongue of flame that lit the tank's own hull for an instant and pointed at it like a finger across the whole black field. Every Sherman crew within sight simply laid their fast guns on the flash and fired. The very act of fighting back, of doing the one aggressive thing the crews ached to do, marked them for death. To shoot in the dark was to shout, "Here I am."
The tanks were not even the whole of it. The night belonged just as much to the men on foot. American and British infantry learned that darkness, so terrifying to a buttoned-up tank crew, was a gift to a man with a bazooka and a steady nerve. A German tank at night could not see the infantryman crawling up its blind flank, could not hear him over its own engine, could not bring a machine gun onto a shadow it never spotted. Accounts survive of tank-hunting teams stalking panthers in the dark, putting a rocket into the thin rear armour from a few metres away and vanishing back into the black before the crew even understood what had killed them. The proudest armour in the world, after dark, could be undone by one frightened man on his belly in a ditch.
And this was the cruel trap the Germans could not escape, because the night was never truly theirs to give up. Allied air power had made daylight movement suicide. The roads of France and the Reich were owned in the light by the fighter bombers. So the German tank arm had been driven into the dark for everything, moving up, supplying, repositioning, all of it done at night to survive the sky. They needed the night to live. And now the enemy had learned to do his killing in that same night. The Germans were caught between a daylight sky that hunted them from above and a darkness that hunted them from the flanks. There was, increasingly,
Here is the idea at the centre of it, the one worth carrying out of this story. The German tank was a weapon built to win the long, clear daylight fight, to see far and strike far. Its every strength was a strength of distance and of sight. But a strength that only works under perfect conditions is not really strength. It is a loan the world can call in. Take away the light, and the tiger was not a lesser predator. It was no predator at all. The lesson the panzer crews learned in the dark is the oldest one there is. The thing that makes you dominant in your best conditions is exactly the thing the enemy will work hardest to take away. And the enemy did. He simply turned out the lights.
A kind of folklore began to move through the German tank units, quiet, unofficial, the way real fear always travels in an army. Stories of whole night attacks that went into the dark and came back as a handful of scorched survivors. Talk of a particular dread that had no name in the manuals, the feeling of sitting in the best tank ever built and knowing it could not save you once the sun was down. Crews began to do the unthinkable for an elite force. They began, on their own, before any order made it official, to simply stop, to pull back at dusk, to refuse to push into the night, to wait out the dark hours and pray for a daylight fight, where their gifts still meant something. Why that quiet refusal hardened into doctrine is the thing we are building toward.
It is hard to overstate what this did to men who had been told and had come to believe that they were the hunters of the battlefield. The German tank crew's entire identity was built on the long shot, on seeing the enemy first, on the cold confidence of the predator who decides when the killing starts. Night took the decision away from them and handed it to the enemy. Now it was the American who chose the moment, who lit the field, who fired first from the dark flank. The German crews went, in the space of a few hours each evening, from the most dangerous men on the battlefield to frightened crews in blind machines, listening at open hatches, flinching at every sound, waiting to be silhouetted and burned. A man can fight fear. It is much harder to fight the feeling that the rules themselves have turned against him.
And so the order we began with stopped being a strange instruction from above and became something the crews themselves wanted. Avoid the night engagement. Hold, withdraw, wait for the light. What had sounded like cowardice from an aggressive army was, in truth, the only sane reading of a battlefield turned upside down after dark. Commanders who pushed their tanks into night attacks anyway were spending their best crews for nothing. The ones who survived learned to read the dusk like a closing door, to get their tanks into cover, into lager, into anything but an open fight before the light failed. The most aggressive armoured force the world had ever seen had quietly conceded half of every day to the enemy.
Not everyone accepted it. There were still commanders who believed the old daylight math would hold in any light, who looked at a Sherman and saw only the Tommy cooker, and could not imagine the dark had changed anything. And so the night counterattacks were ordered, again and again, against the advice of the men who had survived the last one. Tanks were sent rolling forward into the blackness toward an enemy that was, by now, waiting for exactly that. The crews going in could not see the searchlights being readied, the flare guns loaded, the Shermans already laid hull down on their line of advance. They went in believing they were the hunters one more time. What came back, when anything came back, taught the same lesson the others had, and taught it in fire.
The pattern of those night counterattacks reads almost identically across the records, because the dark imposed the same script every time. The German tanks advance, guns forward, blind. The field lights up, flares, searchlight glow, a burning building, it hardly matters which. For 1 or 2 seconds, the panzers are pinned in light like insects, their thin flanks turned toward an enemy they have not yet found. The fast American turrets are already laid. The first shots gut the lead tanks. The survivors, lit and confused, traverse toward muzzle flashes that are already moving. By the time a German gunner finds a target, 3 of his own are burning, and the dark beyond the light is full of guns he will never see.
None of this was an accident, and that is the part the Germans found hardest to accept. The Americans had not stumbled into owning the night. They had decided to take it. Units mauled in daylight studied the problem and reached a cold conclusion. If the German tank's strength was sight and distance, then the answer was to fight where sight and distance did not exist, and to bring just enough light on their own terms to shoot by. They drilled night gunnery. They worked out the flare and searchlight tactics. They taught their crews to use the radio net in the dark and their infantry to hunt armor in it. They turned the hour the Germans thought of as a refuge into the hour of the American kill. It was not better tanks that beat the panzers after dark. It was a better idea about when to fight. And the despised Sherman turned out to be the perfect tool for that idea. The very things German crews mocked were the things that won the night. It was reliable. It started, it ran, it kept running through the long hours of dark movement that broke down heavier, finicky German machines. It was nimble and quick to turn. There were simply enormous numbers of them, so the night did not have to be won by genius. It could be won by many seeing eyes and many fast guns working together in the black. A Tiger was a masterpiece that demanded perfect conditions to shine. A Sherman was a tool that worked in any conditions at all.
including the one the masterpiece could not survive. In the dark, good enough and everywhere beat magnificent and blind.
And that is the answer to the question you came here with. Why did German tank crews refuse to fight American Shermans after dark? Not because the Sherman had become a better tank. By daylight it was still the weaker machine, and they still killed it at will. They refused because the night stripped the German tank of everything that made it superior and handed every one of those advantages to the enemy. After dark, the great gun could not reach. The fine optics could not see. The thick armour could not be kept toward the threat. While the Sherman's speed, its radio, its numbers, and the Americans' lights and flares turned the darkness into a trap. They refused because they had learned in fire the one truth the daylight had hidden.
Conceding the night was not a small thing. It bled the German war effort in ways that never showed up as a single dramatic defeat. An army that cannot fight half the day is an army fighting with one hand. Every night ceded was hours in which the Americans could move, regroup, bring up fuel and ammunition, and prepare the next day's blow without fear of the panzers that ruled the daylight. The initiative, that precious thing the German tank arm had owned since 1939, drained away into the dark. You cannot hold the front when you surrender every sunset, cannot counterattack when your best weapon must wait for dawn. The night blindness of the German tank was not just a tactical embarrassment. It was, quietly, one of the ways the war in the West was lost.
There is a lesson here that has nothing to do with tanks, and the German crews paid for it in the dark, so that you might have it for free. Be very careful of a strength that only works in perfect conditions. The Tiger was magnificent in daylight, on open ground, at long range. And the enemy, being no fool, simply refused to fight it there. He chose the night, the close range, the flank, the conditions in which all that magnificence was worthless. The strong are rarely beaten at their strongest. They are beaten when a patient enemy drags them onto ground where their strength does not count. Whatever your tiger is, your talent, your advantage, the thing you are proudest of, assume your rival is right now looking for the dark in which it cannot see.
If you know this war from films, you know the daylight version of it. The Tiger cresting a hill, the Sherman brewing up, the long-range duel under a hard blue sky. That story is true, but it is only the half of the day the cameras loved. The other half, the half this video is about, almost never reaches the screen. The German tank crews backing away from the dusk, the searchlights washing the clouds, the flares swinging over a field of silhouetted panzers, the bazooka team crawling up a blind flank. Hold both halves in your mind.
It is worth stopping for a moment on the men. On both sides, the night fights were intimate and terrible in a way the long-range duels never were. The American crews crept forward in the dark with their hearts in their throats, knowing the tank they could not yet see might be the dreaded Panther, knowing one mistake meant the Ronson living up to its name. And the German crews, the elite, the proud, sat blind in their masterpieces and listened to tracks in the black and to the soft warnings their machines could not answer, and waited for the flare that would light them up to die. Courage was not the difference. There was courage to spare in both boxes of steel. The difference was that one side had learned to see in the dark, and the other had only learned to fear it.
And the Germans, in the end, admitted it. In after-action reports, in interrogations, in the quiet honesty of post-war memoirs, the Panzermen acknowledged what the night had done to them. They wrote of the helplessness of the blind tank, of the dread of the silhouetting flare, of the wisdom of refusing the night fight their younger selves would have charged straight into. The same crews who had filled the daylight records with their kills filled the night records with their losses and their warnings. It is one of the most honest admissions to come out of the German army that their finest weapon had an off switch, and the enemy had found it, and the only defense they ever discovered was to stop fighting until the sun came back. They had been beaten not by a better tank, but by the dark.
So why have you never heard this? For the same reason the rest of the small, true, humiliating things slip out of the histories. It does not flatter anyone. The German side did not wish to dwell on the year their masterpiece spent hiding from sunset, and the Allied side preferred the cleaner story, the brave Sherman crews outfighting the monster Tiger in fair daylight battle, to the harder truth that they had won by refusing the fair fight, stacking the dark with lights and flares and ambushes until the odds were obscene.
It is worth, at this distance, giving the despised Sherman its due. For 80 years it has been the punchline, the tank that burned, the tank it took 5 of to kill 1 German, the Tommy cooker. And in the daylight duel, all of that is fair. But the daylight duel was never the whole war. The Sherman was built not to win the single heroic engagement, but to be everywhere, to keep running, to fight in any conditions an American commander chose, including the dark, where its speed and its radio and its numbers quietly dismantled the legends. The Tiger won the battles that got painted. The Sherman won the nights that got forgotten, and the nights, added up, were half the war. History remembers the masterpiece, the crews who faced the Sherman after dark.
There is a warning in this for anyone who has ever felt unbeatable in their element. The German tank crews were not foolish or weak. They were genuinely the best in the world at the thing they had trained for, the daylight, long-range, sea-first fight. Their mistake was the oldest one of the strong. They assumed the enemy would meet them in their element, on their terms, where their gifts ruled. He did not. He found the one set of conditions where the master was helpless, and he dragged the whole war into it. If you are ever certain that no one can touch you, ask the harder question. Not whether you are the best in your light, but what happens to you in the dark the other man is, right now, preparing to bring.
By the last winter of the war, the lesson was complete. Whole German formations had stopped even attempting to hold ground against a determined night attack. They would fight the daylight to the last and then slip away in the dark rather than be caught in it. The masterpieces, the Tigers and Panthers that had cost the Reich fortunes on the best of its engineering, spent their final months hoarding fuel, hiding from the sky by day and from the searchlights by night, fighting fewer and fewer of the long-range battles they had been born for. The crews still had their skill. They still, often, had their courage. What they no longer had was an hour of the day that was safely theirs. And a tank arm with no safe hour is a tank arm that has already, in every way that matters, been beaten.
Go back to where we began, to that strange thing happening on the Western Front in the autumn of 1944. The tanks that fought like masters by day and would not fight at all by night. It is not strange anymore. Those crews were not lazy, and they were not cowards. They were elite men, reading their battlefield with brutal honesty, and seeing what their commanders saw and what the records now confirm. That everything that made them lethal switched off when the light did, and everything they had laughed at in the enemy switched on. The pullback at dusk was not a failure of nerve. It was the last grim wisdom of the finest tank crews in the world, the knowledge of exactly how the night would kill them, and the discipline to refuse it the chance.
There is an image worth holding on to from all of this. A tiger,
57 tons of the most feared engineering of the war, a machine that had made veterans pray and whole battalions go still in daylight, sitting silent in cover as the evening comes on, its great gun pointed at nothing, its crew listening at the hatches, waiting out the dark like frightened animals, while somewhere out in the black, a handful of mocked, thin-skinned Shermans move and talk and watch and own the night. That picture is the whole reversal in a single frame. The throne was real. By day it still stood, but every night for the last long year of the war, the war ended. The tanks went to scrap or to plinths in town squares, and the daylight legend hardened into the only story anyone told. The Tiger and the Panther became the monsters of 1,000 films and models and documentaries. The Sherman stayed the brave little loser that somehow won by numbers. And the night, the long, decisive, humiliating night war, the one where the legend was quietly undone, slipped out of the telling almost entirely. But it happened. It is in the records, in the reports, in the careful admissions of the men who lived it. For the last year of the war, the most feared tanks in history refused to fight after dark, and they were right to. And the reason is the whole strange, forgotten lesson of how the night was taken from the kings of the battlefield.
There is one more turn, and it is a strange one. The American crews who took the night rarely thought of themselves as the masters of anything. They knew the daylight truth too well. They had watched their friends burn at long range. They knew their Sherman was outgunned and out-armored, and many went to their graves believing they had simply been the unlucky ones sent against better machines. Most never fully grasped what they had actually done in the dark. That they, the Tommy Cookers, the loser tank, had found the one weakness in the finest armor ever fielded, and exploited it so thoroughly the enemy stopped coming out at night at all. They were not the underdogs of the night. They were its hunters. But the daylight had frightened them so badly that few of them ever believed it.
So take the lesson the German crews learned in fire, and the American crews never quite believed they had taught. Dominance is always conditional. There is no strength so great that it does not depend on something. Light, range, ground, time, and no enemy so weak that he cannot win by taking that something away. The Germans built the perfect daylight tank and lost the night because they forgot their power had a condition. The Americans built a flawed tank and won the night because they found the condition and broke it. Between those two facts sits the whole truth of how the underdog beats the favourite, in war and out of it. Not by becoming stronger, but by changing the question until the favourite's strength stops being the answer.
That is the story the daylight footage never shows you. The panzers backing away from the dusk, the searchlights on the clouds, the flares over the silhouetted tanks, the blind masterpiece waiting out the dark. Remember it the next time you are told that the biggest gun, or the thickest armour, or the most fearsome reputation must surely win. The most feared tanks in history spent the last year of the war refusing to fight after sunset, beaten not by a better machine, but by an enemy who simply turned out the lights and learned to kill in the dark. The king of the daylight ruled until the sun went down, and then, every single night, he climbed down off the throne and hid, and prayed for the morning that would make him a king again.
And yet the night blindness of their tanks was not the strangest fear haunting the German armoured arm in those final months, because there was something else moving against them, something that did not need the dark at all, that struck in broad daylight from a direction their crews had been told was safe, and left burned-out tigers and panthers scattered along roads where no enemy tank had ever been seen. The Panzer men whispered about it, the way they had once whispered about the night. They were certain, at first, that it was impossible. They were wrong about that too. But that is the next stone, and it has not yet been carved.